Well, I've wanted to get this character build out for a while now, but I've been trying it on various other characters, from Stamina Sorcerer to Stamina Nightblade to Stamina DK. Haven't tried it on Stamina Templar per se, mainly because there's not a whole lot of stats that would work towards this type of build, but the type of build I'm talking about is a pet build based around more Colden and Maw. Actual pets in-game, like the Nightshades or the Sorcerer pets, god-awful. Don't even attempt to make a build with them. I was trying to make a build with them. They get about 126 DPS or something like that on stamina characters. On magic characters, it's a different story, but on stamina characters, don't even bother. So what I settled on is my stamina character right here on my Geek the Passionate. And he actually has a pretty interesting way to boost up his DPS and actually get some decent numbers. But I should probably show you the actual gear itself, so here, let me just pop this right back open. Let's close that. The mighty dapper down here. Let's close that too. Alright, so as you can see here, we're wearing all medium, by the way, and you can craft most of this. And I should probably put back on the Sunder Flame, so I was doing an Ember Shield test. But as you can see, we're wearing Maw of the Infernal here, getting Divines, of course, maximum damage output. And so you got more Colden and a little bit of Sunder Flame, because finding Sunder Flame weapons is actually extremely difficult. So I just settled on more Colden Sword sharpened with the increased weapon damage trait, and I've golded them out because that's the biggest DPS boost you'll see. And the reason why I went with swords is that because we're using Sunder Flame to actually naturally enhance the DPS of our group for one, but secondly of the pets themselves, because both of them do physical damage, so giving them more innate penetration makes them do more damage. So when you have the swords combined to Sunder Flame, you also increase the damage of the flame damage on this thing, so you do a little bit more DPS. And on top of that, it just helps with general magic damage with standard, and I believe it's called Flames of Oblivion is the ability we're using. As you can see here, you know, Sunder Flame, Weapon Enchants, of course. Typical everything else is in Divines. You could gold this out, but you really don't need to. And then back bar, we're not really going to be worrying about back bar a whole bunch. This is mainly just a main bar thing. Back bar is used for survivability in this build. But yeah, that's the gear that we got. Move on to traits really quickly. You know, we always cram everything into stamina for this character. Get Shadow so we get the extra bit of critical, because as a Khajiit, we already have 53%. But if you want to make this a little bit more effective, you can use daggers, and that is still also a very good alternative as well. I personally don't have the resources to go flaunting off on those 60,000 or so, making 2 pair of golden daggers. And you see here we have the buffs from Flames of Oblivion. And since this is a heavy attack build, we don't really base ourselves off stamina, so a buy stat food for max health and max stamina is preferable. You see right here. So it gives us a little bit of extra survivability and giving us a little bit of a DPS boost. And you'll end up around 17,000 HP. You can also artificially inflate this by stacking on health glyphs if you're finding that you're dying a lot. That is advised in raid situations where you are likely to die. But like I said, you have all of these on. And CP is an interesting story because since we're a heavy attack build, we're going to have a slightly different setup. Now, the red side of the CP tree, the defense side of the CP tree, we're still going the standard 100 and Hardy, 100 and Elemental Defender, so that we don't get one shot of that 17,000 HP, which is likely to happen. But with the blue tree, I found that using Mighty instead of Precision Strikes, Precise Strikes actually managed to lower my DPS by like a couple hundred. So, I mean, here it doesn't matter. You could put it into Piercing. I wouldn't recommend putting it into Piercing because of the likelihood of overpenetration in trial settings, but in like 4-man content, you'll be fine. But putting it into Mighty and Precise has very minor effects. What actually has the most DPS is actually putting it all into Melee Weapon Expert, and that actually works well with the DK ability that I'm about to show you as well. But Precise Strikes, if you put it into Mighty or Precise, doesn't matter. If you put all this Melee Weapon into Precise as well, so you just have 200 into Ritual, you actually lose a little bit of DPS on the stand build. Because like I said, since we're more core than Maw, we're going to have to do a heavy attack build. But since we're a heavy attack build, resources are really up to what your individual needs are. So for me, I had put it into Magician because of using Flames of Oblivion and the DK ability Igneous Weapons, I believe is what it's called. You need a little bit of extra magic cost reduction so that you can actually sustain it in a rotation, and putting 50 in has actually done it well for me. The rest can go into Tenacity, mainly just so I can get Master Gatherer because I'm a crafting guy, but it also really helps with maintaining your stamina levels when you have to do evasive maneuvers, or when you're actually going through the rotation itself. You don't need a whole bunch, but you need enough. And then, of course, into Tumbling. But really, in an optimal setting, you can just put it all into Tenacity, and the rest into Magician / Warlord, and you'd be fine. Tumbling is really more of just a survivability thing that I find I need occasionally. But that's just the setup I use, so 75 in Tumbling, 75 in Tenacity, and 50 into Magician. That is everything here. So going on to actual skills for this build is actually a slightly different thing. So as you can see here, we are using Molten Armaments. Sorry, that was the... Igneous Weapons is a more commonly used version because it gives you Sorcery and the Major Brutality. But since we're using a heavy attack build, we are using one ability that already gives us that redundant buff. So we can actually put it into Molten Armaments, and since we're a heavy attack build, that's 40% extra DPS, which is a huge amount, and I'm just noticing that cloth is clipping through my guy's waist. Looks hideous. But either way, so we get that extra 40% DPS, as well as, where is it in here? It also gives us I believe, a 5% minor brutality, so that's a kind of a nice little buff right there as well. And as well as gives you stamina back, but I mean, stamina on a heavy attack build, you're really not going to be starving for stamina. Then since we're on dual wield with those 2 more Colton swords I showed you, we also have a Deadly Cloak, and this is really helpful in survivability in dungeons. 20% reduction on AoE damage is absolutely prime for a lot of instances where a character will easily die. Especially if you find yourself using health glyphs and you get your HP up to 20,000. If your HP is up to 20,000 and you have Deadly Cloak on, you survive a hell of a lot, especially when you have that 100 into Hardy and Elemental Defender I showed you in the defense tree. You get that and your guy becomes incredibly tanky and often has an easier time living in most scenarios. But then you're also going to want to use that Flames of Oblivion, which is super nice because it gives us a really nice solid DPS on a single target, increasing our DPS overall, as well as giving us major major savagery, which gives us that little bit of extra critical we need that actually bumps us up to that 50 range really easily. And it actually fits well with Deadly Cloak because, as you can see, it has the exact same duration. So in a rotation with heavy attack, you heavy attack Deadly Cloak, heavy attack Flames of Oblivion. It allows for a perfectly synchronized rotation, which is really helpful. And then we rounded off with, of course, since we're Khajiit and all medium, it wouldn't be a build without Rearming Trap, which would actually adds quite a bit of DPS to this build. Adds about 1,000 to about 2,000 depending on the situation. And it also gives you that minor force, which is really critical. And Rearming Trap has a similar, how would I say, duration to that of Deadly Cloak and Flames of Oblivion. So as you can see, it has a 6-second buff with a 7-second in total for each trap. So you in total have a 14-second buff on the character. So I mean, if you line up all these in a row, these all could be easily heavy attack from this to that, easy rotation on a single target. And then we rounded off with Shrouded Daggers. So while all of these buffs are rotating, you then can heavy attack and then throw one of these out to get your Major Brutality buff, as well as doing a decent single target damage, like around 10 to 14,000 per hit, but as well as doing, you know, a little bit extra AoE damage, which is really nice in scenarios where you have 2 or 3 extra adds, because usually bosses have around 1 to 4 adds, so it helps clearing out those passively. As well as your more Colton and your Maw of the Infernal also doing a slight bit of AoE damage themselves. And then we rounded off with Flawless Dawnbreaker, and this is mainly just so we can have a little bit of extra weapon damage from the passive. And where is it in here in Fighters Guild? To get, I believe, A little bit of extra more right here, an extra 6%, because we have trap and this. So we get a grand total of an extra 11% weapon damage, which is why we have 29,000. And if we had major brutality, that'd be an extra 20%. But since I don't have a target skeleton in my room at the moment, it doesn't really help. Or sorry, I should say in my house. This lovely estate I haven't actually showed you guys in a while. I have done quite a bit of work here, but that's a different video. So like I said, with that, you'll get a nice little bit of extra damage from the passives. But on your back bar, you're always going to want to use the standard of might. And that is just purely because it's a hard-hitting ultimate, and it increases your damage done for a good solid 15 seconds. Or 17 seconds, I should say. So it gives you that really extra spike in DPS, as well as survivability too. So if you're in a hard scenario, you heal yourself, and you give yourself a damage reduction. Great in a lot of scenarios. And here as well, I just throw on a couple of miscellaneous abilities. I really don't use my back bar a whole lot in this build. Is mainly just when it gets to tough scenarios where I then have to throw on these extra abilities, in which it would actually probably be preferable if you used Immovable Brute, because that is a Magicka ability. So two-handed heavy attack, this would be a heavy attack. So yeah, you definitely want to use Immovable Brute and Shuffle just so you can get that extra bit of stats you need in survival situation, as well as having Resolving Vigor. And you want to keep Flames of Oblivion on both bars so that the buff doesn't go away and so it doesn't glitch as much, as well as increasing the critical strike for Resolving Vigor and Cattle Trops if you need it in large scenarios. Say if you're trying to like bait out a whole group into this tiny corner and then burn it down, having that Cattle Trops does an actual huge DPS spike as well. But nothing like this is good unless I show you some DPS tests, so we'll get right onto those right now. So on this first DPS test, we simply just worked with Sunderflame here on that first build I showed you. As you can see, you're just going through gold swords and everything. And this is just a regular target skeleton. Robust would have taken a good solid 15 minutes to kill, so really don't want to go here. But as you can see, this rotation is fairly simple. And what you do is that you just, activate all your abilities and then go straight into combat. Heavy attack, lay down trap, heavy attack, major brutality, and then heavy attack either your ultimates, or you go back into your buff rotation, which is just one buff, heavy attack, a buff, heavy attack, last trap down, and that will complete another 15-second interval where you have free range to either recast the brutality buff. And as you can see, with that simple little build there, and simple little rotation, we were actually able to pull 22,000 DPS on that single target skeleton alone. Now, it doesn't reflect the situation where the bouncing blades of the Shrouded Daggers, I should say, it used to be called bouncing blades, but now it's Shrouded Daggers, in a situation where you'd have 2 to 3 extra adds, so then more Colden and Maw, as well as the Shrouded Daggers, would bounce to multiple targets and actually do a little bit more damage. So 22,000 DPS, as well as the unshown DPS spike that happens actually with your group having an extra bit of penetration, which is actually super useful in trial setting, because a lot of trials actually like to have Sunderflame. Probably not as much now that stand builds have gone out of favor, but different topic. As you can see here, we're flipping a different gear set on, and this gear set is Ember Shield. And why did I choose Ember Shield? Well, it's mainly just to see how much Sunderflame actually affects it, as well as the importance of having a full set of medium armor, because with Ember Shield, it is still another 2-piece 5 set that adds a crap load of HP to us. We lose about 4,000 DPS on this character, not to mention our pets characters. The more Colden and Maul probably lose a little bit of their DPS because they usually have about 2,600 in the Sunderflame setup, and it probably have a little bit low here as well. And as you can see, we ended it up doing a fair bit well. It is nice though, we do have an extra about, what was that, another 6,000 or so HP, so we get really beefy there, but we lose a lot of DPS in the long run. Although in a very high intensity situation where you have a lot of adds, say during the stairs part of Hellroth Citadel, you would actually be able to pull out maybe a little bit more DPS there, as well as live longer as well. But I wouldn't recommend Ember Shield in 99% of scenarios. Still go for the Sunderflame thing. Alrighty, so thank you all for joining me today. I hope this little build was helpful for you guys, as well as fun, because that was the main goal with this build, is to have fun with more Colden and Maw, because in a lot of scenarios, on a lot of dungeon trials, they don't want you running pet builds, because, you know, it's arguably the least DPS effective sets in the game. But, I mean, I'm able to pull close to 22,000 DPS with freaking Maw and more Colden, so I'm able to pump out a decent amount with this. Enough to focus in most trial settings, unless you're trying to go for hard mode, but I mean, even then, I mean, you're still having fun. And that was the main goal of this, and as well as to do a proof of concept. Because a lot of people say that you can't really have more Colden and Maw in a viable DPS setup, so proved them wrong, fuckers. So, I mean, other than that, guys, if you have any questions about this build, any recommendations, any comments or concerns, feel free to leave them down below. And as always, stay thirsty, my friends.